So July 1st, the Workforce Pell grants became law, and joining me to talk about what that means for states, workers, employers who are trying to help create good jobs in their communities is Molly Dillon, Director of Policy Advocacy at America Achieves. Molly, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, before we get started on details of Workforce Pell, tell me a little bit about America Achieves. What do you guys do? What is your goals? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, America Achieves is a nonprofit organization, and we are working to connect economic development, economic policy with good jobs, and make sure that everyone has a pathway to a good job, and trying to figure out how we can help states, the federal government. We are sort of across all of it.
Let's talk about the Workforce Pell. Anybody in the space has heard of Pell grants in the past. What sets a Workforce Pell apart from a regular Pell Grant?
Yeah. So I think even before diving into like the nitty gritty details of Pell, it's helpful to sort of like take a step back and think about where Workforce Pell sits in this moment. So, right now, I would say that there's this fundamental challenge that we have employers who need talent, including in critical industries like healthcare, advanced manufacturing, et cetera. And we have people looking for living wage, good jobs. One recent study actually showed that nearly half of adults working full time in the US do not earn a living wage, according to the MIT Living Wage Index. And so we at America Achieves believe we can actually use the workforce system to try and solve this problem. Ultimately, the system we currently have was built for the relatively so slow pace of the industrial age. And it's not keeping pace with what we need today, especially as you can imagine, as AI has entered the equation. So, Workforce Pell itself is one targeted piece of that. We don't expect it to solve everything. Um, but just the background on Workforce Pell and how we got here. So it was enacted last year as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which had many provisions. But among those was expanding the existing Pell eligibility to short-term, career-focused programs that also meet a whole slew of uh, quality requirements and also lead to a industry recognized credential. So many of us are familiar with like regular Pell Grants. We may have even received one ourselves, probably towards a traditional 2 or 4 year degree. But now Pell Grant has expanded its eligibility to qualify for shorter term programs that are 8 to 15 weeks in length, among a whole other slew of requirements. And those programs themselves have sort of a unique set of requirements that are unique to them that you may not find attached to the like regular Pell grants that we are sort of used to talking about or have received ourselves.
That's great overview, and let's kind of go down a little bit in this because I know, uh, I kind of go through tick by tick. I know that they have to be the programs that are being being used. These grants are being used for. They have to be aligned to high skill, high wage, or in demand sectors of occupations. How is that being determined? Because I could say my job is high demand, but how
Sure.
do you know that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm really glad you asked. So, Workforce Pell also is unique in that there is incredible leeway given to governors to set these definitions. So there are some key requirements for Workforce Pell that
Well,
governors can
and
set.
I want to interrupt and say governors are really a big part of this, right?
Oh,
I
huge.
should have brought that up before. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. No, you're 100% right. There are some requirements they can't, change, but
Mhm.
the how many weeks in length or clock hours these programs can be, that they have to provide this recognized post-secondary credential. They have to hit a 70% completion rate. They have to hit a 70% job placement rate. And actually, after the first 3 years, that job placement has to be in field, specifically what you're trained to do. So it doesn't count
Mhm.
if you just get any old job, which, as you can imagine, is
Yeah.
part of the way the policy was designed. But when it comes to governors, they have incredible authority to set these standards. And there are some baseline things they have to do, like create a definition for high wage, high skill, or in demand. They have to create definitions for all of them. Programs have to meet one of those 3 terms. You would say probably should actually be meeting
Mhm.
2 or 3 of them. Um, but so governors get to define what those mean. They also get to define what it means to be aligned to employer need. They get to define what's stackable, portable, and a couple other terms on that list. And also, when all of this is said and done, the programs have to have met these requirements for a year before it's eligible for Workforce Pell. So it's notable that the federal government themselves said that in the first year, they only expect about 100 programs nationwide to be approved across only about 10 states. So they're not thinking we're coming out and we're approving thousands of programs like
Mhm.
that. There are these requirements that make it harder to get approved, but that is also by design and trying to create a good pipeline to good jobs.
And
So we
yeah,
can talk
and I
to you about
interrupted
this.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I interrupted your definition because I think each state will be different. Each, community is different, and that's why governors have been kinda tasked with this. So how do they define that? How do they define that high demand job again in the community or in the state?
So yeah, you're exactly right. It does vary state to state. States have different methodologies. We've seen some states use like a star rating system that has sort of this like formula behind it. We have states that have sort of some existing methodologies from critical industry lists that they have. It really, really varies. So it will depend, but what we are encouraging is to align those high demand industries also with your high wage definition because you can imagine it's amazing if there is an industry that has all this demand, but if workers aren't being paid living wages coming out of these programs, is that how we want to be directing people? Because something else I would flag is that workforce Pell, while having all of these different requirements than traditional Pell, is also part of the same pot. So every single person has a lifetime eligibility limit for Pell. And your workforce Pell and you're, using it for a college degree or a short-term program, it's one pot per person. And once you use it, it's gone. And so we really are encouraging states to be good stewards of that funds and to take that responsibility very seriously. And therefore to set not just the baseline standard of like, oh, high wage could just be a living wage. That would be great. But how do we actually set a standard that the state says we want it to be a living wage, we want it to be in demand, and create a definition that actually produces good results? And I should say that, these are about short term programs, and short term programs historically have had mixed outcomes. While some do deliver strong labor market returns, many do not. And in part, I think that is because we have not set these strong requirements for data and outcomes and tracking and all of those things that make Pell what it is, Workforce Pell. And so we have an opportunity here to actually be pushing forward programs that do deliver for employers, for learners, for the overall economy. And there's a way to really integrate Workforce Pell into your state's economic priorities, because I know that every state has a list of these are the industries that are critical to us, and how can we align, get everyone rowing in the same direction? And this is one tool in your toolbox. Again, not going to be a solve all solution, but this is brand new federal funding that where it's very exciting, I would say, and is sort of the, a new federal funding opportunity that doesn't come every day.
I know that, the stat that I've seen many times is, only 33% of Americans have a four-year or higher degree.
Yep.
So, this seems to be addressing a majority of people out there who could use this help, and, a lot of these I've done a lot of reporting around this. A lot of people who do these short-term programs have maybe are already in the workforce, so they have time limits, maybe even monetary limits. These are supposed to help. So this should be a program that can help people, get into those programs, be able to afford them, and then, get a better job as a result. So what is this, the part about they have to have a stackable, portable credential, and I believe industry recognized, right?
Yep.
Well, I guess that limits some of the areas that it could cover.
Yeah, I mean, states get to define what that means. Traditionally, stackable means that it can be stacked towards credit. The programs themselves also have to articulate to credit. This is the first time that non-degree, we've really been tracking outcomes for non-degree programs, and that non-degree programs have been steered towards credit as well. So that's a big change also. And portal meaning across more than one employer is sort of the definition,
Mhm.
the baseline definition that's in the statute. But again, states get to really expand upon what that means and define it for themselves. I will say America Achieves has partnered with the National Governors Association's Chairs Initiative on Workforce Pell. I'll just give ourselves a little plug here.
Good.
We wrote an overview for governors that covers many of these definitions that they get to set, and with recommendations, explanations of what it means, etc. And that is also part of a greater resource library, a Workforce Pell resource library that America Achieves has on our website, americaachieves.org, and that defines many of these terms. We have these great, very useful, if I might say so myself, one pagers that defines stackable, portable, etc. Um, but yes, I really can't emphasize enough how much authority governors get as part of this new federal program to say what works for their state. But that also means that they have the responsibility to set good quality standards. That's not just okay. This is the very least that we are required to do. We can actually raise that bar, which again might mean fewer programs are approved at first. And we would also say like if you're a state and I'm talking to you, I would say start small. It is so much easier to view this as a pilot to get some strong programs going and then expand it than to approve a whole bunch of programs and try and rescind some of those um, approvals later down the road, find out that they're not actually giving the outcomes that you want. Like, really start small and targeted and build. And also, I will say, at this point, Workforce Pell went into effect July 1st. I have been saying to states, prepare, don't panic, because I think a lot of people were seeing it as a deadline, but it's just a starting date. And a lot of states, if not all of the states, have started creating their policies where they write those definitions, for example. Um, but those policies also shouldn't be carved into stone. They should be adaptable as you are rolling out your Pell policy and saying, okay, for next year, this is how we're going to update our state policy. We really are encouraging states to like think of this as like a living breathing policy that you get to update, especially because think about what's an in-demand job in your state. That should be changing slightly, if not more than slightly,
Mhm.
every year. And we really want states to be keeping their list of programs modern, updated to what is in demand. Your high wage definition might be anchored to some number, and that number may go up or down or whatever it is. So thinking about this again, not as just, okay, we've written this and we're done. This should be a policy that you are revisiting, throughout the year and putting out new versions of it. And that's what we've been advising states to do. And we've been lucky enough to advise a number of states so far on Workforce Pell. And, states are all in different places. So again, don't panic. A lot of state policies have not been finalized. My very first point, there are employers who have jobs open, good jobs that need talent, and you have workers who want good jobs. This is how you bridge that gap, or at least one way you can bridge that gap.
And finally, I'd like to you made a mention of it already, that these workforce Pells, count for an individual toward their lifetime
Mhm.
amount. What would you advise individuals on? I know you advise states, but what would you tell individuals who are going, "Oh, this my state is offering this." Uh, how should they look at it?
Yeah. Well, first, if you want to find out what your Pell eligibility is, you fill out your FAFSA form, just like traditional workforce Pell as we know it. I would say taking a look at your state's policy, which again may or may not be published at this time, but should be published soon, and seeing what those in demand occupations are. Hopefully, states are also publishing the associated like average wages, mean median wage for their in demand occupations so that you can go in as an informed consumer and say, okay, that industry, those kinds of jobs, that sounds like something I would be interested in. Oh, okay. And here's what I can expect to make coming out of a program like that. And starting there and trying to align your own interests with what your state has put out. It might be the case that in the summer of 2026, there might not be any programs approved yet. So also being a little bit patient, but you can always connect with your state's um, whether it's a Department of Workforce Development or whatever it's called in your state, to ask questions about, these kinds of programs, when they might be approved, what you can expect to see in your state. But yeah, I would start there if you can find your in-demand occupations list and hopefully some wage information, which again is, I know you asked about what I would advise students, but I would advise states to publish that because, you know, you you should go into this informed. It doesn't, to me, make sense to have, you go into an industry and you just have no idea what you can expect to make, or it's some vague number that is not really associated with the actual programs you're going into. Again, this is all about setting that high bar and having high quality programs. And when you do that, you make the job of the individual so much easier because we know people are raising families, probably working another job, might be, in some other type of training program. Like people are busy and we should serve their needs and their interests and what works for them by creating like this really excellent runway for them to come down and be part of the Workforce Pell system.
Great guidance and great information, Molly. Thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Anytime, I'm happy to chat.
I've been speaking with Molly Dillon, Director of Policy Advocacy at America Achieves for the Future of Workers newsletter and podcast. I'm Ramona Schindelheim. Thanks for listening.